Life has a way of testing our resilience in the most unexpected ways. The story of Sarah Mitchell is one such tale of extraordinary hardship and even more extraordinary courage. Left widowed and pregnant, then cast out by the very people who should have been her sanctuary, Sarah found herself alone, facing a brutal winter on the Dakota Plains in 1879. What happened next would not only save her life, but rewrite her understanding of family, courage, and belonging. This is the remarkable true story of how a chance encounter with a Lakota warrior named Elijah Blackfox changed the course of two lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The harsh winter wind rattled the windows of the Mitchell family homestead as Sarah clutched her swollen belly, tears freezing on her cheeks almost as quickly as they fell. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been Sarah Collins, wife to Thomas Mitchell, with dreams of starting a family in the small frontier town of Cedar Ridge, Dakota Territory. Now at 22 years old, she was a widow, 6 months pregnant and being forced out of the only home she had known for the past year. "You need to be gone by sundown," Warren Mitchell, her father-in-law, said coldly, placing a small bag of her belongings by the door. "We never approved of Thomas marrying you, and we certainly aren't responsible for you or whatever child you're carrying." Sarah stared in disbelief at the man who had always regarded her with thinly veiled contempt. "No, but Mr. Thomas was your son. This baby is your grandchild." Harriet Mitchell emerged from the kitchen, her face a stone mask of indifference. "For all we know, that baby isn't even Thomas's. He's been gone for nearly 2 months now." The accusation cut through Sarah like a blade. Thomas had died in a mining accident 7 weeks earlier, leaving her alone and devastated. His parents had tolerated her presence in those initial weeks of grief, but their true feelings were now laid bare. "How can you say that? I loved Thomas with all my heart," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Love doesn't put food on the table or pay for extra mouths to feed," Warren replied. "The property is ours, and we want you gone." The stage to Bismarck. "Leaves at 4. There's a women's shelter there that takes in your kind." Sarah knew arguing was futile. The Mitchells had made up their minds, and in this remote territory she had no family, no allies to turn to. With trembling hands, she gathered her shawl around her shoulders and picked up the pitiful bag containing all that remained of her life with Thomas. A few dresses, his pocket watch, their wedding photograph, and the baby blanket she had been knitting. The journey to the stagecoach station was a blur of bitter cold and despair. When Sarah arrived, another blow awaited her. "Sorry, ma'am," the station master said, not meeting her eyes. "Last coach of the day has already left, and there won't be another for 3 days on account of the storm coming in." 3 days. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "But I have nowhere to go tonight." The station master shuffled uncomfortably. "Can't help you there. Station closes in an hour." With nowhere to turn, Sarah found herself wandering the main street of Cedar Ridge as snowflakes began to fall more heavily. The general store was closing up, and the saloon was no place for a woman in her condition. The church was locked, and the Reverend lived 2 miles outside of town. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped further, Sarah made a desperate decision. On the edge of town stood an abandoned trapper's cabin. It offered little protection from the elements, its roof partially collapsed, windows broken, but it was better than freezing to death in the open. The cabin was somehow even colder inside than out, the wind whistling through countless gaps in the walls. Sarah gathered what little dry wood remained in a corner, and with fingers nearly numb, managed to start a small fire. It would not last the night, but perhaps long enough for her to regain some feeling in her extremities. As she huddled close to the meager flames, Sarah placed her hands over her rounded belly, feeling the gentle movements of her child within. "I'm so sorry, little one," she whispered. "Your father would have loved you so much. He would have known what to do." For the first time since Thomas's death, Sarah allowed herself to fully break down, her sobs echoing in the empty cabin. She must have fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion, because the next thing Sarah knew, the fire had died to embers, and the cold had settled into her bones. The snow was now a full blizzard, howling outside the cabin walls. Sarah tried to stand but found her legs unresponsive, the cold having sapped her strength. It was then that she heard it, the sound of horses' hooves approaching, barely audible over the storm. Fear gripped her heart. Who would be out in such weather? Cedar Ridge had its share of unsavory characters, and an abandoned cabin would make an ideal shelter for anyone caught in the blizzard. Sarah shrank back against the wall as the cabin door creaked open, sending a swirl of snow across the dirt floor. A tall figure stood in the doorway, face obscured by a fur-lined hood. The stranger paused, obviously surprised to find the cabin. "Occupied? I mean no harm," a deep voice said, as the figure stepped inside and closed the door against the storm. The man, for it was clearly a man from his voice and build, lowered his hood, revealing striking features that immediately identified him as Native American. His black hair was pulled back from his face, and his dark eyes surveyed the cabin with calm assessment before settling on Sarah. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said simply. "Not in your condition. Not in this storm." Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around herself, unsure whether to be relieved or terrified. Relations between settlers and the native tribes were tense at best, openly hostile at worst. Yet there was nothing threatening in this man's demeanor. "I had nowhere else to go," she admitted. The man nodded, as if her situation required no further explanation. Without asking permission, he began to efficiently rebuild the fire, adding wood from a supply he had apparently brought with him. "My name is Elijah Blackfox," he said, as the flames began to grow. "I was heading to the reservation when the storm hit. Saw smoke from your fire earlier." Sarah hesitated before responding. "I'm Sarah Mitchell." Elijah nodded again, then removed a small pouch from inside his coat. "You need to eat, for the baby." Sarah's hunger, temporarily forgotten in her fear and cold, returned with a vengeance at the mention of food. Elijah handed her strips of dried meat and a small portion of cornbread. She ate slowly, cautiously at first, then with increasing urgency as her body demanded nourishment. "Thank you," she said when she had finished. "The storm is getting worse," Elijah observed, moving to the window to peer out into the darkness. "It's not safe to travel tonight. We should stay here until morning." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety at the idea of spending the night in the cabin with this stranger, but the alternative, being alone in the blizzard, was far worse. Besides, there was something in Elijah's calm demeanor that inspired trust. "Are you Lakota?" she asked, attempting to ease her nervousness with conversation. Elijah turned from the window. "Yes. My mother was Lakota. My father was a white trader. I lived between both worlds." His expression suggested this was not always an easy position to occupy. As the night progressed, Elijah maintained a respectful distance, focusing on keeping the fire alive and occasionally checking outside for any break in the storm. Sarah found herself dozing off, warmed by the fire and comforted by the presence of another human being after days of isolation and rejection. She was awakened by a sharp pain in her abdomen. Gasping, Sarah clutched at her belly, fear coursing through her. Elijah was instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "The baby," Sarah managed to say between gritted teeth. "Something's wrong, it's too early." Concern flashed across Elijah's face. Without hesitation, he moved to her side, helping her to lie back against his rolled-up coat. "How early?" he asked, his voice calm but serious. 3 months, Sarah whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Please, I can't lose this baby. It's all I have left of Thomas. Elijah's expression softened slightly. I've helped with births before. My mother was a healer, but we need to stop these pains now. He rummaged in his pack and produced a small leather pouch. From it he extracted dried herbs that he then steeped in hot water heated over the fire. The bitter tea he offered Sarah smelled of earth and plants unfamiliar to her. It will help. Calm the baby, he explained. Drink it all. Sarah did as instructed, forcing down the bitter liquid. Elijah then placed his hands gently on her abdomen, feeling with experienced fingers. The baby is restless, but I don't think it's coming yet, he said after a moment. You need rest and warmth, and no more traveling in this condition. I don't have a choice, Sarah replied, the pain beginning to subside slightly. My husband's parents threw me out. I have no money, no family here. Elijah's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his dark eyes. Perhaps anger, perhaps understanding. Why would they do this? He asked. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah hesitated, then decided there was little point in hiding the truth. They never wanted Thomas to marry me. I came from nothing, an orphan who worked as a seamstress. They thought he could do better. After he died, her voice broke. They said the baby might not even be his, but it is. Thomas was the only man I've ever loved. Elijah was silent for a long moment. White people's ways are strange to me, he finally said. Among my people, a widow and her children would be cared for by the family. It is our responsibility, our honor. The pain had subsided enough for Sarah to sit up slightly. Where will you go when the storm passes? Back to the reservation, Elijah replied. I work as a scout for the army sometimes, and as a translator. I was in Cedar Ridge delivering messages. Sarah nodded, knowing the reservation was at least 2 days' ride from town. An idea began to form in her mind. Desperate, perhaps even foolish, but her options were non-existent. Could I go with you, she asked, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. Just until I can figure out what to do next. I can cook, clean, sew. I could make myself useful. Elijah's expression was unreadable. The reservation is no place for a white woman, especially one carrying a child. Please, Sarah pressed. I have nowhere else to go. The women's shelter in Bismarck is 3 days' journey, and I don't think I can make it there. Not now. Elijah stood and moved back to the window, his broad shoulders tense. Sarah waited, heart pounding, for his answer. There's a small trading post a half-day's ride from here, he finally said. The owner, Jackson Cooper, and his wife are good people. They might take you in, at least temporarily. Hope flickered within Sarah. Do you know them well? Cooper trades fairly with both settlers and Indians, Elijah replied. He helped my mother once when she was ill. His wife, Mary, is kind. Sarah felt relief wash over her. Even temporary shelter would give her time to think, to plan her next move. Thank you, she said simply. Elijah nodded, then returned to his position on the other side of the fire. Rest now. The storm should pass by morning and we'll leave at first light. Sarah settled back, the herb tea having eased her pain considerably. As she drifted towards sleep, she found herself studying her unexpected savior. Elijah Blackfox was unlike any man she had encountered before, reserved yet clearly compassionate, living in 2 worlds, but seemingly belonging fully to neither. Morning arrived with blessed stillness, the blizzard having blown itself out overnight. The world outside the cabin was transformed into a pristine landscape of white, the sun creating diamond-like sparkles across the untouched snow. Elijah had risen before dawn and gone outside briefly, returning with news that the trail, while challenging, would be passable on horseback. He helped Sarah onto his horse, a sturdy paint that seemed unbothered by the extra weight, and they set off toward the trading post. The journey was slow and largely silent. Sarah, exhausted from the previous day's events and still concerned about her early contractions, concentrated on staying upright in the saddle. Elijah walked alongside, leading the horse carefully through the deeper snowdrifts. It was nearly noon when the trading post came into view, a substantial log building with smoke rising cheerfully from its chimney. Several smaller outbuildings formed a rough semicircle behind the main structure, and a corral containing a few horses stood to one side. As they approached, a man emerged from the trading post, tall, broad-shouldered, with a full beard streaked with grey, despite his relatively young appearance. He squinted at them for a moment before recognition dawned on his face. Black Fox. Didn't expect to see anyone on the trails after that storm, he called out, his voice friendly but curious as he took in the sight of Sarah perched on Elijah's horse. Cooper, Elijah acknowledged with a nod. Found this woman stranded in the old Wilson cabin during the blizzard. She needs help. Jackson Cooper approached, concern evident in his weathered face as he took in Sarah's pregnant condition. "Ma'am," he said, offering a hand to help her dismount. "You look half frozen. Come inside where it's warm." Sarah allowed herself to be helped down, her legs wobbly after the long ride. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I'm Sarah Mitchell." "Just Cooper is fine," he replied with a kind smile. "Everyone calls me that. Let's get you inside. Mary will fix you right." Up. The interior of the trading post was blessedly warm, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The space was divided between the store itself, shelves stocked with supplies of all kinds, and a living area furnished with simple but comfortable-looking furniture. A woman appeared from a back room, wiping her hands on an apron. She was plump and pleasant-faced, her brown hair streaked with grey and pulled back in a practical bun. "Who's this then?" she asked, her eyes widening as she took in Sarah's condition. "Mary, this is Sarah Mitchell," Cooper explained. "Black Fox found her caught in the storm. She's in a family way and needs some looking after." Mary Cooper immediately took charge, ushering Sarah to a chair by the fire and removing her snow-dampened shawl. "Poor dear, you're chilled to the bone. Let me get you some hot tea and stew." As Mary bustled about, Cooper turned to Elijah, who had remained near the door. "Where'd you find her?" "Old Trapper's cabin on the edge of Cedar Ridge," Elijah replied. "She had been thrown out by her in-laws after her husband died. The baby is due in 3 months. Cooper's expression darkened. "Thrown out? In winter? With a child coming?" He shook his head in disgust. "Some people have no decency." Mary returned with a steaming mug and bowl, which she placed in Sarah's trembling hands. "Drink this, dear. Then we'll get you some dry clothes." Sarah accepted the offerings gratefully, the warmth of the mug seeping into her cold fingers. I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if Mr. Black Fox hadn't found me." "You'd have frozen to death, most likely," Cooper said bluntly. "Lucky thing Elijah has a habit of finding trouble." Elijah, who had been standing quietly by the door, shifted slightly. "I should continue the reservation. They're expecting me." Sarah looked up, suddenly alarmed at the prospect of her rescuer leaving. Despite having just met the Coopers, who seemed genuinely kind, Elijah represented safety in her mind. Mary noticed her expression. "Nonsense," she said firmly. "You'll stay for a hot meal at least, Elijah Black Fox. The reservation can wait another hour or 2. To Sarah's surprise, Elijah nodded in acquiescence. Cooper gestured for him to take a seat at the table, while Mary disappeared back into what appeared to be a kitchen. "So," Cooper said, settling into a chair across from Sarah, "what's your plan now, Mrs. Mitchell?" Sarah stared into her tea, the question bringing her precarious situation into sharp focus once again. I don't really have one," she admitted. I was trying to reach Bismarck, where there's a women's shelter, but Bismarck's a long way in your condition, Cooper said thoughtfully, and not much better when you get there. Those shelters. He trailed off, shaking his head. I can work, Sarah offered quickly. I'm a skilled seamstress. I could earn my own keep until the baby comes. Cooper and Elijah exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. As it happens, Cooper said slowly, we could use some help around here. Mary's been complaining about needing an extra pair of hands, especially with spring trading season coming up. We've got a small cabin out back that no one's using. Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Cooper? If you're willing to work hard, yes, Cooper confirmed. Room, board, and a small wage. Mary returned, carrying a tray, loaded with plates of steaming stew and cornbread. What's this about a job? She asked, distributing the food. Cooper explained, and Mary's face lit up. Oh, that would be wonderful. And you say you can sew? Perfect. I've got a pile of mending taller than me, and my eyes aren't what they used to be. Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes. Tears of relief, of gratitude. I don't know how to thank you both. No need for thanks, Mary said kindly. We've been praying for help, and here you are. The Lord works in mysterious ways. As they ate, Sarah found herself repeatedly glancing at Elijah, who consumed his meal in thoughtful silence. This man, this stranger who owed her nothing, had saved not just her life, but her child's as well. And now, through his connection to the Coopers, he had potentially given her a future too. When the meal was finished, Elijah rose to take his leave. Cooper walked him outside, presumably to discuss matters not meant for the women's ears, while Mary showed Sarah to the small cabin that would become her new home. It was a simple structure, one room with a small fireplace, a bed, a table, and 2 chairs, but to Sarah it looked like paradise compared to her prospects just hours before. It's not much, Mary apologized, but it's solid and warm when the fire's going. It's perfect, Sarah assured her, running her hand over the rough-hewn table, more than I dared hope for. When they returned to the main building, Elijah was already mounted on his horse, prepared to leave. Sarah stepped forward, looking up at the man who had changed the course of her life in less than a day. Mr. Blackfox, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it, I owe you a debt I can never repay. Elijah looked down at her, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. There is no debt. My people believe that all life is connected. What happens to one happens to all. Sarah nodded, understanding on some level the philosophy behind his words. Will you come back so I can tell you how we're doing? She placed a hand on her belly, indicating both herself and her unborn child. For the first time, Elijah's mouth curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. I will return. The Coopers are good people. They will take care of you until then. With that, he nodded to Cooper, and Mary turned his horse and rode away, his figure gradually diminishing. Against the vast white landscape, Sarah watched until he disappeared from view, wondering at the strange turns life could take, how in the space of 2 days she had lost everything, faced death, and found unexpected salvation. As Mary gently led her back inside to get settled, Sarah placed both hands protectively over her belly. We're going to be all right, she whispered to her unborn child. I don't know how yet, but we're going to be all right. The weeks following Sarah's arrival at Cooper's trading post passed in a blur of activity. True to her word, she proved herself an invaluable addition to the small operation. Her nimble fingers made quick work of the backlog of mending Mary had accumulated, and she soon began taking orders from customers who discovered her talent with a needle and thread. February gave way to March, and the snow began to recede, revealing muddy paths and the first hints of green. With the improving weather came increased traffic to the trading post as trappers, settlers, and Native Americans emerged from winter isolation to replenish supplies. Sarah's belly grew rounder with each passing day. She was now 7 months along, and the baby was active, kicking and rolling in ways that both delighted and exhausted her. Mary Cooper had become something of a surrogate mother, fussing over Sarah's diet and rest, sharing wisdom gleaned from raising 4 children of her own, all now grown and living in various parts of the territory. "You're carrying low," Mary observed one evening as they sat by the fire after the store had closed. "That means a boy. Mark my words." Sarah smiled, running her hand over the swell of her abdomen. "Thomas always wanted a son. Said he'd teach him to fish and hunt and build things with his hands." Her smile faltered slightly at the memory. "Tell me about him," Mary prompted gently. "Your husband." Sarah's eyes grew distant. "Thomas was kind, gentle in ways most men aren't. He worked in the mines to save money for our own homestead, but his real passion was carpentry. He made the most beautiful furniture you've ever seen." She paused, swallowing against the familiar tightness in her throat. "We had only been married a year when the accident happened. The mine shaft collapsed. They said it was quick, that he didn't suffer." Mary reached across and squeezed Sarah's hand. "God never gives us more than we can handle, dear. Though sometimes I wish he didn't think so highly of our abilities." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Cooper, who had been doing inventory behind the counter, moved to the window. "Rider coming in," he announced. "Single, moving slow." In the months since Sarah had arrived, she had learned that unexpected visitors after dark were cause for caution. Cooper reached for the shotgun he kept beneath the counter, a precaution born of years spent in frontier territory where law was often a distant concept. The horse and rider emerged from the gathering dusk into the pool of light cast by the trading post's windows. Sarah's heart leapt when she recognized the distinctive paint horse. "It's Elijah," she said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. Cooper relaxed, setting the shotgun aside. "So it is. Been wondering when he'd show up again." True to his word, Elijah Blackfox had returned to the trading post several times over the past months. His visits were brief, typically coinciding with errands that brought him in the direction of Cedar Ridge. Each time, he would inquire after Sarah's health, accept a meal from Mary, perhaps spend a night in the barn if the hour was late, and then continue on his way by morning. Cooper went to the door, calling out a greeting as Elijah dismounted. The Lakota man acknowledged him with a nod, leading his horse toward the small stable. He returned moments later, stomping mud from his boots before entering the warmth of the trading post. "Black Fox," Cooper said, clasping the man's shoulder. "In welcome. Good to see you. Mary's just about to put on coffee." Elijah's dark eyes found Sarah immediately, assessing her with that steady gaze that had become familiar to her. "You're well?" he asked simply. Sarah nodded, feeling suddenly self-conscious about her expanded waistline. "Very well, thank you." Mary bustled forward. "Don't just stand there in the doorway, Elijah. Come in and get warm. You look half frozen and thin as a rail. Are they feeding you properly on that reservation?" A ghost of a smile touched Elijah's lips. "Hello, Mrs. Cooper. It's just Mary, as you well know," she chided, already moving toward the kitchen. "Sit down. I'll bring food." Elijah took a seat at the table, removing his hat and placing it beside him. Sarah noticed that his hair, usually bound back, now hung loose around his shoulders. There was a new scar along his jawline that hadn't been there during his last visit. "What brings you our way?" Cooper asked, taking a seat across from him. "Army business?" Elijah shook his head. "Personal. There's been trouble at the reservation. Food shortages. Government rations haven't arrived in 6 weeks. Cooper frowned. Again, damn bureaucrats in Washington wouldn't know their backsides from a hole in the ground. "Language, Jackson," Mary called from the kitchen. "Sorry, dear," Cooper replied automatically, though his expression remained stormy. "How bad is it?" "Bad," Elijah said simply. "Children are hungry. Elders, too weak to hunt, are suffering the most." Sarah felt a pang of distress at the thought of children going hungry. Despite never having met any of the people Elijah described, she felt connected to their suffering. "Is there anything we can do?" she asked. Elijah glanced at her, seemingly surprised by the offer. "That's why I came, to trade. I have furs, beadwork, and some silver jewelry made by the women." Cooper nodded thoughtfully. "I can give you fair prices, certainly, but I imagine you'll need more than what those items will bring." "I also came to ask if there is work," Elijah continued. "Anything that would allow me to earn supplies to take back." Mary returned with a tray bearing coffee and bowls of stew, which she placed before Elijah. "Eat first, business later," she instructed firmly. As Elijah ate, Cooper stroked his beard thoughtfully. "As it happens, I could use some help. Got a shipment coming in from Fort Pierre next week. Big one. Need someone to help unload, organize, and take inventory. It's 3 days' work at least." Hope flickered in Elijah's eyes. "I can do that. Pay would be fair. Cash or supplies, your choice." "Supplies," Elijah said without hesitation. "Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee if possible." Cooper nodded. "Consider it done. You can bunk in the barn while you're here." "I can mend whatever clothing needs repair while you're here too," Sarah offered. "No charge." Elijah's gaze met hers, and something passed between them. Gratitude, perhaps, or something deeper that Sarah wasn't ready to name. He simply nodded, returning his attention to his meal. Later that evening, after Mary and Cooper had retired to their rooms in the loft above the store, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. The baby was particularly active, its kicks and rolls keeping her awake. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped outside, thinking some fresh air might help. The night was clear, with stars scattered like diamonds across the vast prairie sky. Sarah settled on the bench outside the trading post, breathing deeply of the cool spring air. The sound of a soft footfall made her turn. Elijah emerged from the shadows near the barn, apparently also restless. He hesitated when he saw her. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said. "You didn't," Sarah assured him. "The baby is keeping me awake. Seems to think nighttime is for dancing." Elijah approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her on the bench. Sarah nodded, and he sat, his presence solid and somehow comforting in the darkness. "The stars are different here," Elijah observed after a moment of silence. "Lower, closer to the earth." Sarah followed his gaze upward. "Are they different on the reservation?" "No," he replied. "I mean different from where I grew up, near the Black Hills. My mother's people called that place home for generations before the government moved us." It was the most Elijah had ever shared about his past, and Sarah treaded carefully, not wanting to disrupt this rare moment of openness. "Do you remember it well? The Black Hills?" Elijah was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. Then softly, "I remember everything. The streams are full of fish, forests so thick the sun barely reached the ground, the sound of wind in the pines. It sounds beautiful. It was sacred." His voice held an edge now. "Now white men dig for gold there, cut down the ancient trees, kill the game." Sarah felt a pang of guilt, though she personally had no part in the displacement of Elijah's people. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Elijah turned to look at her, his expression softening in the moonlight. "You have nothing to apologize for, Sarah." Mitchell, the use of her name, sent an unexpected warmth through her. Elijah rarely addressed her directly, and when he did, it was usually as Mrs. Mitchell. "I worry about your people," she admitted. The children especially. It's not right that they should go hungry." "No," Elijah agreed. "It's not right. But it happens all the same." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of wind through the new spring grass. "May I ask you something?" Sarah ventured after a while. Elijah inclined his head slightly, an invitation to continue. "That day, in the storm, why did you help me? You could have just moved on, found another shelter." Elijah considered the question carefully before answering. "My mother was once in a similar position, alone with a child in danger. A stranger helped her." He paused. "That stranger was my father." Sarah was startled by this revelation. "What happened to them?" "My father was a fur trader. He found my mother abandoned by her people because she refused to marry the man chosen. For her, he took her in, protected her. Later they married in both the White Way and the Lakota Way." Elijah's voice held a distant quality, as if recalling a story told to him many times. "They lived together until a fever took my father when I was 12. My mother returned to her people then, taking me with her. It was difficult. I belonged nowhere, too white for the Lakota, too Indian for the whites." "Is your mother still alive?" Sarah asked gently. "No, she died 3 winters ago." "I'm sorry." Sarah hesitated, then added, "I never knew my parents. They died of cholera when I was an infant. I was raised in an orphanage in St. Louis until I was old enough to work as a maid, then as a seamstress." It was Elijah's turn to express sympathy. "So you know what it is to be alone." Sarah nodded. "Until Thomas. He was the first person who ever truly saw me." She placed a protective hand over her belly. "Now I have this little one." "You also have the Coopers," Elijah pointed out. "They care for you." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "I've been blessed in that way." She paused, then added softly, "And I have you. You've saved us twice now, first from the storm, then by bringing us here." Elijah seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I did very little." "You did everything," Sarah insisted. "Without you, my baby and I would have died in that cabin." The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly vigorous kick, causing Sarah to wince slightly. Noticing her discomfort, Elijah frowned. "You should rest," he said, rising from the bench. "The night air is still cold." Sarah knew he was right, but found herself reluctant to end their conversation. These quiet exchanges with Elijah had become precious to her, offering a glimpse into the complex man who had altered the course of her life so dramatically. "Good night, Mr. Black Fox," she said, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Elijah," he corrected quietly. "Just Elijah." Sarah smiled in the darkness. "Good night, Elijah." "Good night, Sarah Mitchell." The following days fell into a rhythm. Cooper's shipment arrived as expected, and Elijah proved himself an efficient worker, moving crates and barrels with ease, organizing inventory with surprising precision. Sarah continued her sewing, though she found her gaze drawn frequently to the window, where she could observe Elijah at work. Mary, ever perceptive, noticed. "He's a handsome man," she commented mildly one afternoon, as they prepared vegetables for the evening meal. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." Mary's knowing smile suggested otherwise. "I've seen the way you watch him, and the way he watches you when he thinks no one is looking." "That's absurd," Sarah protested, though her heart quickened at the suggestion. "I'm a widow, about to have another man's child. And Elijah he's different," Mary supplied. "From a different world." "Yes," Sarah admitted. "There could never be anything between us," Mary shrugged. "Stranger things have happened. Cooper's cousin married a Cherokee woman back in '63. They have 5 beautiful children, and the happiest marriage I know." Sarah shook her head, unwilling to entertain such impossible thoughts. "Elijah will return to the reservation when the work is done. I'll remain here. That's all there is to it. If you say so, dear, Mary replied, though her tone suggested she remained unconvinced. The third day of Elijah's employment brought unexpected visitors to the trading post. Sarah was organizing thread by color when the sound of multiple horses approaching drew her attention. Cooper moved to the window, his expression darkening. "Army patrol," he muttered. "Lieutenant Miller and his men." Elijah, who had been stacking flour sacks in the storeroom, appeared in the doorway, his body tense. "Stay inside," Cooper instructed him. "I'll handle this." Sarah watched anxiously as Cooper went out to meet the soldiers, 6 men led by a young officer with a rigid posture and hard eyes. Through the window, she could hear fragments of conversation, checking all outlying properties, reports of renegade Indians, stolen horses near Cedar Ridge. Cooper's response was measured but firm. "Haven't seen anything suspicious. Just the usual traders and trappers." Lieutenant Miller's gaze swept over the trading post. "Mind if we take a look around?" Before Cooper could respond, the door opened and Mary emerged with a welcoming smile. "Lieutenant, what a pleasant surprise. Have you and your men ridden far today? I just put coffee on." The lieutenant's stern demeanor softened slightly in the face of Mary's hospitality. "Thank you, Mrs. Cooper, but we're on patrol. Perhaps another time." "Nonsense," Mary insisted. "At least let me send you some fresh bread. I baked it this morning." She disappeared back into the trading post, effectively ending the conversation. Cooper seized the opportunity. "As you can see, Lieutenant, it's just us and our seamstress, Mrs. Mitchell, a widow from Cedar Ridge who's helping out until her baby arrives." Miller's attention shifted, noticing Sarah through the window. His gaze lingered on her pregnant form, and she felt a chill despite the warm spring day. "Mrs. Mitchell," he acknowledged with a nod. "My condolences on your loss." Sarah forced a polite smile but said nothing. Mary returned with a cloth-wrapped bundle, which she pressed into the lieutenant's hands. "For you and your men, and please tell Major Williams that those shirts he ordered will be ready next week." The distraction worked. The lieutenant thanked Mary, gave final instructions to Cooper about reporting any suspicious Indians, and led his men away. Only when the patrol was well out of sight did the tension in the trading post dissipate. Elijah emerged from the storeroom, his face unreadable. "They're looking for someone specific," Cooper said. "Got any ideas who?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "There was an incident last week. 3 young men from the reservation left without permission, frustrated by the food shortages. They were caught trying to retrieve horses that once belonged to their families, horses the Army requisitioned last year." "Were you involved?" Cooper asked bluntly. "No," Elijah replied, "but I know the men." "They're boys, really, foolish, hungry boys," Cooper sighed heavily. "The Army won't see it that way. They'll see horse thieves or worse." "Will they come back?" "The soldiers?" Sarah asked, one hand protectively covering her belly. "Eventually," Cooper confirmed. "Miller's a stickler for rules. He'll make a full circuit of the area." The implications hung heavily in the air. If the soldiers returned and found Elijah at the trading post, questions would be asked, suspicions raised. "I should leave," Elijah said, voicing what they all were thinking. "Tonight, my presence puts you all at risk." "Nonsense," Mary objected. "You haven't finished the work and you haven't received your supplies. The boys at the reservation are still hungry." Elijah hesitated, clearly torn between his responsibility to his people and the danger his presence might bring to the Coopers and Sarah. "The soldiers won't be back for at least 3 days, Cooper reasoned. "They have to patrol the entire northern section. You can finish the work, get your supplies, and be gone before they return." After a moment of consideration, Elijah nodded. 2 more days. Then I go." The decision made, they returned to their tasks, though the carefree atmosphere of previous days had vanished. Sarah found herself glancing frequently at the road, half expecting to see the soldiers return. The baby, sensing her anxiety perhaps, moved restlessly within her. That night, after dinner, Sarah retreated to her cabin early, claiming fatigue. The truth was more complicated. The lieutenant's appearance had shaken her more than she cared to admit, not just because of the danger to Elijah, but because it reminded her of her tenuous position. She was dependent on the Coopers' charity, with a baby soon to arrive and few prospects beyond continuing as their seamstress. A soft knock on her door disrupted her melancholy thoughts. She opened it to find Elijah standing outside, a small bundle in his hands. "May I come in?" he asked. Sarah hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. Propriety suggested she shouldn't allow a man into her cabin alone, but conventional rules seemed less important given their unusual circumstances. Elijah entered, his tall frame making the small space seem even smaller. He held out the bundle. "For the baby," he said simply. Surprised, Sarah unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small pair of moccasins, exquisitely crafted from soft leather and adorned with delicate beadwork in a pattern of blues and whites. "Oh," she breathed, running her fingers over the tiny shoes. "They're beautiful." "My mother taught me," Elijah explained, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "In our tradition, a baby's first moccasins are important. They represent the path the child will walk in life." Sarah felt tears prick behind her eyes. "Thank you. This means so much to me. To us." She placed a hand on her belly. Elijah nodded, seeming uncomfortable with her emotion. "I should go, it's late." "Wait," Sarah said impulsively. "Please stay a moment. There's something I've been wanting to ask you." Curiosity flickered across Elijah's features. He remained where he stood, waiting. Sarah took a deep breath. "When you go back to the reservation, would it be possible for me to come with you?" The question clearly caught Elijah by surprise. His brow furrowed. "Why would you want to do that? The Coopers have been so kind, but I can't impose on them forever. Once the baby comes, I'll need to find my own way." Sarah spoke quickly, trying to articulate thoughts that had been forming. "For weeks, I could be useful there. I could teach sewing, help with the children, perhaps even start a small school. I had some education at the orphanage." Elijah's expression was unreadable in the dim lamplight. "The reservation is no place for a white woman and her child. Life there is hard, harder than you can imagine." "Life is hard everywhere for a woman alone," Sarah countered. "At least there, I might serve a purpose beyond just surviving." "The army wouldn't allow it," Elijah said. "White settlers aren't permitted to live on reservation land. But surely exceptions can be made for teachers or missionaries." Elijah's jaw tightened. "We've had enough missionaries trying to save us." Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "That's not what I meant. I don't want to change anyone. I just want to help, to make a difference, to—" She broke off, realizing how naive she must sound to him. Elijah's expression softened slightly. "Your heart is good, Sarah Mitchell, but the reservation is not your answer. The Coopers will help you find a proper place when the time comes." Sarah wanted to argue further, but saw the determination in Elijah's eyes. This was not a battle she would win tonight. "You're probably right," she conceded, though disappointment settled heavily in her chest. Elijah moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to her. "The baby's father, Thomas. What kind of man was he?" The unexpected question caught Sarah off guard. "He was kind," she said after a moment. "Gentle. He had dreams of building us a real home someday, with a garden and fruit trees." Elijah nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "He would want you and his child to be safe. To have a good life." "Yes," Sarah agreed softly. "He would. Then honor his memory by finding that safe place," Elijah said. not by following a man like me to a place of hunger and despair." Before Sarah could respond, he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. She stood in the center of her small cabin, clutching the tiny moccasins, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The rejection stung, but something else troubled her more. The realization that her interest in the reservation might have less to do with helping others and more to do with the man who had just walked away. Dawn broke with ominous gray clouds building on the horizon. Sarah awoke to the sound of distant thunder and the knowledge that this would be Elijah's last day at the trading post. Their conversation from the previous night weighed heavily on her mind as she dressed and made her way to the main building. Cooper was already at work, preparing the supplies Elijah had earned through his labor. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, dried beans, and other essentials were carefully measured and packed into burlap sacks. "Storm's coming," Cooper observed as Sarah entered. "Big one by the look of those clouds." "Will Elijah still leave today?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Cooper gave her a knowing look. "Man's got responsibilities. His people are counting on him." Sarah nodded, busying herself with organizing the spools of thread she'd been working on the day before. Through the window, she could see Elijah leading his horse from the barn, preparing for departure. Mary emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "I've packed food for his journey," she said. "Though I still think he should wait until the storm passes." "Told him the same," Cooper replied. "He's set on going." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest at the thought of Elijah traveling through a storm, especially given what had happened the last time they'd encountered such weather. The parallels were not lost on her. Once again, a blizzard was brewing. But this time, she would be safe while Elijah faced the elements. The trading post door opened and Elijah entered, his expression determined. "I need to leave soon. The storm is moving fast." Cooper nodded, gesturing to the supplies he'd prepared. "It's all ready. I added extra coffee, figured the people might appreciate a small luxury." Gratitude flickered across Elijah's face. "Thanked you, both of you." His gaze shifted to Sarah, who was pretending to be absorbed in her work. "Mrs. Mitchell." Sarah looked up, meeting his eyes. "Mr. Blackfox." They had reverted to formality, as if the intimate conversation of the previous night had never occurred. Sarah felt a pang of regret, but didn't know how to bridge the sudden distance between them. Mary broke the awkward silence. "At least stay for breakfast, Elijah. I've made Johnny cakes, and there's fresh coffee." Before Elijah could respond, the sound of approaching riders filtered through the morning air. Cooper moved swiftly to the window, his posture tensing. "Army patrol," he said grimly. "Miller's men. They're back early." A flash of alarm crossed Elijah's face. If the soldiers found him here, especially now loaded with supplies intended for the reservation, questions would be raised. Questions that could lead to trouble for everyone involved. "The storeroom," Cooper said decisively. "Quick." Elijah hesitated, clearly reluctant to hide like a criminal, but the stakes were too high to risk confrontation. He moved swiftly toward the back room, disappearing just as the riders drew up outside the trading post. Cooper positioned himself casually behind the counter, while Mary and Sarah tried to appear occupied with normal morning activities. The door swung open and Lieutenant Miller entered, followed by two of his men. His sharp gaze surveyed the interior of the trading post. "Mr. Cooper," he acknowledged with a nod. "Ladies, apologies for the early call." "Not at all, Lieutenant," Cooper replied, his voice betraying none of his concern. "What brings you back so soon? Thought you'd be patrolling the northern section for another day or two." Miller removed his hat, revealing hair plastered to his forehead with sweat despite the cool morning. "Change of plans. We apprehended one of the horse thieves near the Wilkinson farm yesterday evening. He had some interesting information to share." Sarah felt her heart rate accelerate. She busied herself with her thread, afraid her face might betray their secret. "That's so?" Cooper asked mildly. Glad to hear you resolved the matter. Not entirely resolved, Miller corrected. The boy claims they were acting on orders from someone at the reservation, someone who moves between the white and Indian worlds. His gaze hardened. Someone like Elijah Blackfox. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sarah nearly dropped the spool she was holding. Blackfox, Cooper repeated, his surprise sounding genuine to Sarah's ears. Haven't seen him in weeks. Last I heard, he was doing translation work for the Indian agent at Fort Randall. Miller's eyes narrowed slightly. Funny, one of my men thought he spotted Blackfox's paint horse in your stable yesterday. That old paint? Cooper shook his head. Belongs to Thaddeus Walsh now. Blackfox sold it to him last month. Thad's been delivering mail between here and Cedar Ridge. The lieutenant didn't look entirely convinced. You wouldn't lie to an army officer, would you, Cooper? That would be a serious offense. Wouldn't dream of it, Lieutenant, Cooper assured him. Feel free to check the stable if you'd like. That dropped off mail 2 days ago and left his horse to rest. Said he'd be back today or tomorrow. Miller seemed to consider this for a moment. I think I will have a look. He nodded to one of his men, who immediately headed for the door. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. If they discovered Elijah, the consequences would be severe for everyone involved. Her eyes darted to the storeroom door, willing Elijah to remain hidden. Mary, seemingly unperturbed, poured a cup of coffee and offered it to the lieutenant. While your man checks, why don't you have some coffee? Fresh made this morning. Miller accepted the cup with a tight smile. Thank you, Mrs. Cooper. An uncomfortable silence descended as they waited for the soldier to return from the stable. Sarah found herself counting heartbeats, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly where the baby had begun to stir. After what seemed an eternity, the door opened and the soldier returned. Horse is there, sir, but no sign it belongs to any Indian. Has Walsh's brand on the saddle. Relief washed over Sarah, though she was careful not to let it show. Cooper must have anticipated this possibility and prepared accordingly. Miller frowned, clearly disappointed. He set down his coffee cup with a sharp click. Very well. We'll continue our search elsewhere. He fixed Cooper with a stern look. If you see Blackfox, you're to report it immediately. He's wanted for questioning regarding these thefts. Of course, Lieutenant, Cooper agreed smoothly. Always happy to help the army. Miller replaced his hat and moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to Sarah. Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it? I understand you arrived in the territory recently. Sarah swallowed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Yes, a few months ago. And you're from St. Louis originally, Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. My husband and I moved to Cedar Ridge last year before his passing. Miller studied her for a moment. My condolences again. This is a harsh land for a woman alone, especially one in your condition. His gaze dropped briefly to her protruding belly. If you ever need assistance, the army is here to protect all white settlers. The emphasis on white was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah managed a polite smile. Thank you, Lieutenant. The Coopers have been very kind. With a final nod, Miller departed, his men following close behind. No one in the trading post moved until the sound of hooves had faded into the distance. Only then did Cooper release a long, slow breath. That was too close, he muttered, moving to the window to ensure the soldiers were truly gone. Mary sat down, the pot of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. I thought for sure they'd search the storeroom. Military protocol, Cooper explained. They need probable cause or permission from the owner to search private areas of a residence or business. Miller's too much of a stickler for rules to break that one. The storeroom door opened cautiously, and Elijah emerged, his expression grave. I should go immediately. They'll likely circle back once they've checked other properties. Cooper nodded in agreement. Take the south trail for the first few miles, then cut east toward the reservation. Should keep you well clear of their patrol. Route, the storm. Mary began, gesturing toward the increasingly dark sky. I've ridden through worse, Elijah assured her. The supplies need to reach the reservation today. No one argued further. Cooper helped Elijah load the supplies onto his horse, which had, indeed, been marked with a temporary brand to support their story. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this departure might be final. As Elijah prepared to mount, Sarah stepped forward, unable to let him leave. Without a proper goodbye, Elijah, she said softly, using his first name without hesitation. Please be careful. He turned to her, his dark eyes softening slightly. I will. Will you? Sarah hesitated, uncertain how to express what she wanted to say. Will you come back? When is it safer? Elijah glanced toward the road where the soldiers had disappeared. It may never be safer, Sarah Mitchell. Then promise you'll at least let us know you arrive safely, she pressed. Send word somehow. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I promise. With that, he mounted his horse and, with a final nod to Cooper and Mary, rode away in the direction opposite from where the soldiers had gone. Sarah watched until he disappeared from view, her emotions a tangled mess of fear, worry, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Mary placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Come inside, dear. That baby needs breakfast, even if you don't. The day passed slowly, the promised storm arriving with fury by mid-afternoon. Rain lashed the trading. Post and thunder shook the walls. Sarah found it impossible to concentrate on her sewing, her thoughts constantly with Elijah, imagining him riding through the deluge, perhaps seeking shelter under trees or in a ravine. He'll be fine, Cooper assured her, noticing her distraction. Black Fox knows this territory better than anyone, probably reached the reservation before the worst of the storm hit. Sarah nodded, though she wasn't convinced. The weather had turned vicious quickly, and Elijah had been forced to take an unfamiliar route to avoid the soldiers. As evening approached with no break in the storm, Cooper secured the trading post for the night. Sarah retired to her cabin, though she knew sleep would be elusive. The rain hammered on the roof, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the small space, casting eerie shadows across the walls. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the storm and thinking of that first night in the abandoned cabin when Elijah had found her. So much has changed since then. She had found safety with the Coopers, meaningful work, even a sense of belonging. Yet there was an emptiness too, a yearning for something she couldn't quite define. The baby kicked vigorously, as if protesting her melancholy thoughts. Sarah smiled, placing her hand over the spot where a tiny foot or elbow had created a visible bulge. You're right, she whispered. We have much to be thankful for. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the cabin's door, making Sarah jump. She was about to return to her bed when she heard it, a sound not of the storm, but of something or someone outside. Cautiously she approached the door, her heart pounding. Another sound, a dull thud, like something heavy falling against the outer wall. Sarah hesitated, fear and curiosity warring within her. The trading post was too far away for her to run there safely in the storm, especially in her condition. Making a decision, she grabbed the small knife Cooper had given her for protection and slowly opened the door a crack. Lightning flashed, illuminating. A dark shape huddled against the side of the cabin. Sarah gasped, pulling the door open wider. In the brief burst of light, she recognized the figure immediately. "Elijah!" she cried, rushing forward without thought for the rain now soaking her. Nightdress. He was slumped against the cabin wall, his clothing drenched and his face ashen. Blood mixed with rainwater on one side of his head. "Inside," he managed to say, his voice barely audible above the storm. With difficulty, Sarah helped him to his feet and guided him into the cabin. He collapsed onto the single chair, water pooling. Beneath him on the wooden floor, "What happened?" Sarah asked, quickly moving to light a lamp. "The soldiers?" Elijah shook his head, wincing at the movement. "Horse spooked during lightning strike. Fell, hit my head." His speech was labored, each word seeming to require great effort. Sarah's heart raced with alarm as she examined him in the lamplight. A deep gash ran along his temple, still bleeding freely. His left arm hung at an awkward angle, possibly broken. But most concerning was the glazed look in his eyes and the pallor of his skin. "I need to get Cooper," she said, turning toward the door. Elijah's hand shot out, grasping her wrist with surprising strength. "No, soldiers might return. Can't risk the Coopers." "But you need help," Sarah protested. "Your head, your arm." "You," Elijah said simply. "Just you." Sarah stared at him, suddenly aware of the gravity of the situation. If she fetched Cooper, she would be exposing him and Mary to risk if the soldiers returned. But if she didn't, Elijah's injuries might worsen without proper treatment. Taking a deep breath, Sarah made her decision. "All right, but you must let me help you properly." Elijah nodded weakly, releasing her wrist. Sarah worked quickly, drawing on skills learned during her years at the orphanage, where medical care was often self-administered. She heated water on the small stove, tore strips from one of her petticoats, for bandages, and gathered the few medicinal supplies she had on hand. The head wound required cleaning and careful stitching. Sarah's fingers were steady as she worked, despite her anxiety. Elijah remained conscious but increasingly feverish, occasionally murmuring in Lakota, words Sarah couldn't understand but recognized as prayers or perhaps delirious ramblings. His left arm was indeed broken, though thankfully a clean break. Sarah fashioned a splint from pieces of kindling and bound it tightly with more strips of fabric. Throughout the procedure, Elijah remained stoically silent, only the occasional sharp intake of breath betraying his pain. When she had done all she could, Sarah helped him to her bed. He protested weakly. "Your condition. You need rest." "I'm pregnant, not helpless," Sarah replied firmly. "The chair will do for me tonight." Too weak to argue further, Elijah allowed himself to be guided to the bed. Sarah covered him with blankets, alarmed at how he shivered despite the fever burning through him. "The supplies," he murmured as his eyes began to close. "Need to reach reservation." "We'll figure that out tomorrow," Sarah soothed. "Sleep now." As Elijah drifted into uneasy slumber, Sarah settled into the chair, preparing for a long night of watchfulness. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the small cabin, a different kind of tempest was brewing, one of conflicting loyalties, growing feelings, and uncertain futures. Morning arrived with clearing skies and an improvement in Elijah's condition. The fever had broken sometime in the early hours, and though he was weak, his mind was clear once more. Sarah had dozed fitfully in the chair, waking frequently to check on her patient. "You should have called Cooper," Elijah said, watching as Sarah prepared a simple breakfast from her limited stores. "And risk bringing trouble to their door." Sarah shook her head. "Besides, you specifically asked me not to." "I was delirious," he pointed out, "yet sensible enough to worry about their safety," Sarah countered. She brought him a cup of tea steeped with willow bark. "Drink this. It will help with the pain." Elijah complied, grimacing at the bitter taste. "The supplies are hidden beneath a tarp behind the cabin," Sarah informed him. "I checked during a break in the rain. Everything is secure, if a bit damp." Surprise and appreciation flickered across Elijah's face. "You thought of everything." "Not everything," Sarah admitted. "I don't know how we're going to get those supplies to your people. You're in no condition to ride, and your horse ran off in the storm." Elijah frowned, clearly troubled by this reality. "The children are hungry. The elders are weak. They're Or counting on those supplies? Sarah bit her lip, an idea forming, one she knew would meet with resistance. I could take them. Elijah's reaction was immediate and definitive. No. Hear me out, Sarah persisted. Cooper has a wagon we could borrow. I could drive it to the reservation, deliver the supplies, and return by nightfall. It's too dangerous, Elijah argued. The army patrols would have no reason to stop. A pregnant white woman driving a wagon, Sarah finished for him. I'd be invisible to them, just another settler going about her business. The reservation is no place for a white woman. Yes, you've mentioned that, Sarah interrupted, a hint of impatience creeping into her voice. But this isn't about me moving there. It's about delivering supplies to people who desperately need them. Elijah studied her, his dark eyes unreadable. Why would you risk this? These are not your people. This is not your fight. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Because it's the right thing to do. Because no child should go hungry when I have the means to help. Because... She hesitated, then added softly, because they matter to you, so they matter to me. A complex array of emotions crossed Elijah's face, surprise, confusion, and something deeper that Sarah couldn't quite identify. For a long moment he said nothing, seemingly weighing options and consequences. If I agree to this, he finally said, you must promise to follow my instructions exactly. The reservation can be unpredictable, especially for outsiders. Hope surged within Sarah. I promise. Elijah nodded slowly, his decision made. I'll draw you a map. There's a back route that avoids the main army checkpoints. When you arrive, ask for Standing Elk. He's one of the elders who speaks English. Tell him I sent you. Sarah felt a curious mixture of trepidation and excitement at the prospect of undertaking this mission. It would be risky, certainly, but also meaningful in a way few things in her life had been. What about you? She asked, suddenly concerned about leaving Elijah alone and injured. If the soldiers come, I'll hide in the root cellar beneath the cabin floor, Elijah assured her. Cooper showed me when I built the shelves for it last month. Sarah hadn't even known there was a cellar beneath her cabin. The revelation made her wonder what other secrets might be hidden in plain sight around the trading post. I'll need to tell the Coopers, she said. They'll worry if they see me driving off with a wagon. Elijah considered this, then nodded. Cooper, yes, he should know, but make him understand the danger, both to himself and to you, if this goes wrong. Sarah agreed, relieved that she wouldn't need to deceive the couple who had shown her such kindness. She helped Elijah drink more tea and eat a few bites of the simple breakfast she'd prepared, then made preparations to visit the main building. Before leaving, she paused at the door. Elijah, thank you for trusting me with this. He regarded her solemnly. I'm trusting you with the lives of my people, Sarah Mitchell. Don't make me regret it. The seriousness of his words settled over her like a physical weight. With a nod of understanding, Sarah stepped out into the bright morning, her mind already racing with plans and possibilities. She was about to enter a world entirely unlike any she had known, a world that might change her forever. Cooper's reaction to Sarah's plan was exactly as she had anticipated, initial shock followed by firm opposition. Absolutely not, he declared, pacing the trading post floor while Mary looked on with concern. It's too dangerous, especially in your condition. Sarah stood her ground. Elijah risked everything to bring those supplies. His people are starving. I can't just let those provisions sit while children go hungry. And what about your child? Cooper countered, gesturing to her swollen belly. What happens if you go into labor on the reservation, or if the army stops? Have you thought about what Miller would do if he caught you smuggling supplies? I've thought of all that, Sarah replied calmly. The baby isn't due for another 6 weeks. The army has no reason to stop a pregnant white woman driving a wagon. As far as they know, I could be visiting family or delivering goods. Cooper shook his head, unconvinced. "It's a fool's errand, Sarah." "Then I'm a fool," she said simply. "But I'm still going." Mary, who had been silent during the exchange, finally spoke. "Jackson, maybe we should listen to her. Sarah's a grown woman, and this clearly matters to her." Cooper turned to his wife in surprise. "You support this madness?" Mary approached Sarah, studying her face carefully. "This isn't just about the supplies, is it, dear?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm under Mary's perceptive gaze. "The supplies are what matter most," she insisted, though she couldn't quite meet the older woman's eyes. A knowing look passed between Mary and Cooper. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "If you're determined to do this, we'll help," he conceded. "But on one condition: you take the marked trail only, and you're back before sunset. If there's any sign of trouble, any at all, you turn around immediately." Relief washed over Sarah. "Thank you. I promise to be careful." Cooper nodded grimly. "I'll prepare the wagon. Mary, can you pack some additional supplies, food for the journey and some extra blankets?" As the Coopers set about making preparations, Sarah returned to her cabin to check on Elijah. She found him sitting up, laboriously drawing a map on a scrap of paper despite his injured arm. "The Coopers agreed," she announced, closing the door. Behind her, Elijah looked up, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "Cooper is a good man, but this plan is still dangerous." "So you've said," Sarah replied, sitting across from him. "Yet here we are." A ghost of a smile touched Elijah's lips. "You are stubborn, Sarah Mitchell." "I prefer determined," she countered. With a small smile of her own, Elijah pushed the rudimentary map toward her. "Memorize this. Don't take it with you. If you're stopped, a map to the reservation would raise questions." Sarah studied the drawing intently, a series of landmarks and turning points that would guide her through the back country to the reservation. "This trail," Elijah explained, pointing to a particular route, "follows a creek bed for nearly 2 miles. It's rocky, but the wagon should manage if you take it slowly. The creek leads to a stand of cottonwood trees. Turn east there, and you'll see a hill shaped like a buffalo's hump. The reservation lies in the valley beyond." Sarah committed each detail to memory, asking questions about difficult passages and potential hazards. When she was confident she understood the route, Elijah continued with further instructions. "When you arrive, there will be sentries, young men who watch the boundaries. Tell them you bring supplies from Black Fox. They will escort you to Standing Elk." "What is he like?" "The Standing Elk?" Sarah asked. "He is traditional, cautious of whites but fair-minded. He was a friend to my father and has always shown me respect despite my mixed blood." Elijah paused, considering his next words carefully. "Be direct with him. Our people value honesty. Don't make promises you can't keep." Sarah nodded, absorbing the advice. "Will there be others who speak English?" "Some. The younger ones who attended the government school before returning to the old ways." A shadow crossed Elijah's face. "Those schools are not places of learning, but of erasure. They take our language, our customs, our very names." Sarah had heard whispers of the Indian schools, but had given little thought to their purpose or methods. The bitterness in Elijah's voice spoke volumes about the damage they inflicted. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been terrible." "I was spared," Elijah replied. "My father insisted I learn both worlds on my own terms. Not all are so fortunate." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Cooper entered, his expression serious. "Wagon's ready," he announced. "Loaded. The supplies and added some extra provisions. There's a shotgun under the seat just in case." Sarah rose, smoothing her dress nervously. The reality of what she was about to do suddenly seemed overwhelming. "Remember," Cooper continued, "stick to the trail Black Fox showed you. If you're not back by sunset, I'll come looking." "She'll be safe," Elijah assured him, though his eyes betrayed his concern. "The people will honor her as my messenger." Cooper nodded, then left, to make final preparations. Sarah gathered her shawl and a small bag containing necessities for the journey. "I should go," she said, turning back to Elijah. "Is there anything specific you want me to tell your people?" Elijah was silent for a moment, then spoke softly in Lakota, the flowing syllables musical to Sarah's ears. "Teach me," she requested. "Mitakuye oyasing," he repeated slowly. "It means we are all related, or all my relations. It reminds us that everything is connected, people, animals, the earth itself." Sarah practiced the phrase several times until Elijah nodded in approval. "Tell them this, and they will understand why you have come." With those words of guidance, Sarah departed, her heart racing with a mixture of apprehension and determination. The morning sun had burned away the last clouds from yesterday's storm, leaving the sky a brilliant blue. Cooper helped her onto the wagon seat, handing her the reins with a final admonition to be careful. "God go with you," Mary called from the trading post door, her face etched with worry. Sarah clicked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward, beginning the journey that would take her into a world few white women had seen up close. As the trading post receded behind her, Sarah found herself whispering the Lakota phrase Elijah had taught her, drawing comfort from the unfamiliar words and their powerful meaning. The journey proved more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. The trail Elijah had mapped led through increasingly rugged terrain, across shallow streams, through thickets of brush, and over rocky outcroppings that jostled the wagon alarmingly. The baby protested the rough ride with vigorous kicks, forcing Sarah to stop occasionally to catch her breath and soothe her unborn child. By midday, she reached the creek bed Elijah had described. The wagon wheels bounced and scraped over stones, the horses straining against the harness. Sarah kept the reins loose, allowing the animals to pick their way carefully along the difficult path. As promised, the creek led to a stand of cottonwood. Trees, their leaves shimmering silver-green in the afternoon light. Sarah paused in their shade, drinking from the water canteen Mary had provided and allowing the horses to rest. According to Elijah's directions, she was now halfway to the reservation. Continuing eastward, Sarah soon spotted the buffalo hump hill rising against the horizon. Her heart quickened. The reservation lay just beyond. As she guided the wagon toward the hill, a movement caught her eye, a flash of color against the golden grasses. Sarah tensed, her hand instinctively moving toward the shotgun beneath the seat. Cooper's warnings echoed in her mind, but as the wagon drew closer, she realized what she was seeing. A young boy, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, watching her intently from the tall grass. When he saw that she had spotted him, the boy stood, revealing himself fully. He wore a mixture of traditional and Western clothing, buckskin leggings with a faded cotton shirt. His black hair hung in 2 braids, and his dark eyes regarded Sarah with wary curiosity. "Hello," Sarah called, keeping her voice gentle. "I bring supplies from Black Fox." At the mention of Elijah's name, the boy's expression changed from suspicion to interest. Without a word, he darted away, disappearing over the crest of a small rise. "Wait!" Sarah called, but he was already gone. Uncertain whether to continue or wait, Sarah guided the wagon forward toward the hill. She had just started up the slope when riders appeared at the summit, 3 men on horseback, their faces stern and watchful. The boy reappeared beside them, pointing down at Sarah. One of the men, older than the others with streaks of gray in his long hair, spoke rapidly to his companions. Then, raising his hand in a gesture that was neither welcome nor threat, he rode down to meet Sarah. "You say Black Fox sends you," he stated in accented but clear English. "Where is he?" "Injured," Sarah replied honestly. "He was caught in yesterday's storm while trying to deliver these supplies. I've come to his place." The man's gaze took in Sarah's pregnant state, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. "You are his woman?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "No," she said quickly. I am a friend. He helped me when I was in need. Now I will help him." The man studied her face, as if searching for deception. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, for he nodded slowly. "I am Red Hawk. Standing Elk is expecting supplies, not a white woman." "Will you take me to him?" Sarah asked. "The journey has been long, and I must return before dark." Red Hawk considered this, then gestured for her to follow. "Come, but understand. Some of our people have suffered greatly at the hands of whites. They may not welcome you." With that warning, he turned his horse and began climbing the hill. Sarah clicked to her team, and the wagon rumbled forward. At the summit, she caught her breath at the view spread before her. The reservation sprawled across the valley below, a collection of canvas teepees and wooden structures arranged in a loose circle around a central clearing. Smoke rose from cooking. Fires and children played among the dwellings, their laughter carrying faintly on the breeze. As the wagon descended into the valley, Sarah felt the weight of curious stares. Women paused in their work to watch her pass, their expressions ranging from open hostility to guarded interest. Children ran alongside the wagon, pointing and chattering in Lakota. Red Hawk led her to a large teepee at the far side of the encampment. Outside, an elderly man sat on a blanket, his weathered face impassive as he observed their approach. Despite his obvious age, he carried himself with dignity, his back straight and his dark eyes alert. "Standing Elk," Red Hawk announced, dismounting. "This woman brings supplies from Black Fox, who is injured." The elder studied Sarah for a long, uncomfortable moment before speaking. "Where does Black Fox hurt?" "He fell from his horse during the storm," Sarah explained, climbing carefully down from the wagon. "His arm is broken, and he suffered a head wound, but he's recovering well." Standing Elk nodded slowly. "And you came to his place?" "Why?" The directness of the question reminded Sarah of Elijah's advice. "Be honest." "Because people are hungry here. Because the supplies were needed. Because it was the right thing to do." Her simple answer seemed to satisfy the elder. He gestured toward the wagon. "Show me what you have brought." Sarah led him to the wagon, where they began unloading. The precious cargo, flour, coffee, beans, salt pork, and the additional provisions the Coopers had contributed. Women approached cautiously, then with increasing enthusiasm as they realized the nature of the delivery. Soon, a line had formed, with Standing Elk directing the distribution according to need. Families with many children receiving larger portions, elders given priority for the coffee and sugar. As Sarah helped organize the supplies, she found herself drawn into conversation with some of the women. Most spoke little English, but they communicated through gestures and the few Lakota words Elijah had taught her. When she spoke Mitakuye or Yasing, their faces brightened with surprise and approval. A young woman named Dawn Sky, who had attended the government school and spoke good English, appointed herself Sarah's guide, explaining aspects of reservation life and translating conversations. "How do you know Black Fox?" Dawn Sky asked, as they distributed coffee to a group of elderly women. "He found me during a blizzard," Sarah replied, deciding that the simple truth was best. "I had nowhere to go. He brought me to safety." Dawn Sky translated this to the other women, who nodded and murmured among themselves. One elderly woman approached Sarah, placing a gnarled hand on her swollen belly and speaking softly in Lakota. "She asks when your baby comes," Dawn Sky translated. 6 weeks, Sarah replied, placing her own hand alongside the woman's. The old woman smiled, revealing missing teeth, and spoke again at length. "She says your baby is strong, like its mother," Dawn Sky explained. "She says it will be a boy who walks between worlds, understanding both sides of his heritage." Sarah felt a curious flutter at these words, not entirely from the baby's movement. "Thank her for me," she said softly. As the afternoon waned, Sarah became aware that she needed to begin her journey back to the trading post. Standing Elk approached as she prepared to depart. "You have done a good thing," he acknowledged. "Tell Black Fox that his people are grateful and that we pray for his swift healing." Sarah nodded, touched by the genuine warmth that had replaced the initial suspicion. "I will. And you," Standing Elk continued, his eyes drifting to her belly, "you carry new life in dangerous times. Be watchful." The warning sent a chill through Sarah despite the warm afternoon. "I will," she promised again. As she climbed back onto the wagon seat, Dawn Sky approached with a small bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. "For your baby," she explained, placing it in Sarah's hands. "Made by the grandmothers. They say it will protect the child and connect him to all his relations." Sarah unwrapped the gift to find a tiny medicine pouch on a leather cord, decorated with intricate beadwork in a pattern of blues and whites, colors matching the moccasins Elijah had given her. "It's beautiful," she breathed, deeply touched by the unexpected gesture. "Please thank them for me." Dawn Sky smiled. "They already know your heart is grateful. Safe journey, Sarah Mitchell." With final farewells, Sarah turned the wagon and began the climb out of the valley. Red Hawk and another young man accompanied her to the reservation boundaries, ensuring her safe passage. At the crest of the buffalo-humped hill, they bid her, "Farewell. Tell Black Fox we look for his return when he is healed," Red Hawk said. "And you, white woman who is not afraid, you would be welcome again." Sarah thanked him, then set the horses toward home, her mind swirling with impressions of all she had seen and experienced. The reservation and its people were nothing like the savage caricatures portrayed in penny dreadfuls and newspaper accounts. Instead, she had found dignity, generosity, and a profound sense of community despite desperate circumstances. The return journey passed without incident, though Sarah pushed the horses harder than she might have otherwise, aware of the setting sun and her promise to Cooper. Shadows lengthened across the prairie as the trading post finally came into view, a welcoming beacon in the gathering dusk. Cooper was waiting outside, shotgun in hand, his face creased with worry. When he spotted the wagon, relief washed over his features. "Thank the Lord," he muttered, coming forward to help Sarah down from the seat. "Another half hour and I'd have come looking." "I'm fine," Sarah assured him, though in truth the long journey had left her exhausted, her back aching and her feet swollen. Everything went smoothly. "Black Fox has been beside himself with worry," Cooper informed her as he began unhitching the horses. "Been at the window every 5 minutes since noon." The thought of Elijah, concerned for her safety, brought a warm glow to Sarah's chest. She made her way to her cabin, eager to share the day's experiences. She found Elijah sitting by the window as Cooper had described, his normally composed features drawn with tension. When she entered, he rose quickly despite his injuries, relief plain on his face. "You're safe," he stated, as if needing to confirm what his eyes told him. "As promised," Sarah replied with a tired smile. "The supplies were distributed, and your people sent their prayers for your recovery." Elijah moved closer, studying her face. "And they treated you well. They were cautious at first, but once they understood why I'd come, they were kind. Standing Elk sends his regards, and Dawn Sky gave me this." She showed him the medicine pouch. "For the baby." A complex array of emotions crossed Elijah's face as he examined the beadwork. "This pattern, it belongs to my mother's family. The grandmothers must have recognized something in you." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, puzzled. Elijah's dark eyes met hers. "They believe in signs, in connections that run deeper than blood or marriage. By giving this to your child, they've claimed him as part of our circle." The significance of the gesture slowly dawned on Sarah. "They've accepted my baby as one of their own." "In a way," Elijah confirmed. "It's an honor rarely bestowed on outsiders." Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the day's events and this final revelation. I never expected. I only wanted to help. And that, Sarah Mitchell, Elijah said softly, is why they honored you. Not for what you are, but for what you did. He paused, then added with uncharacteristic emotion, as do I. In the gathering darkness of the small cabin, something shifted between them. A recognition of bonds formed through shared purpose and mutual respect. Sarah felt it as clearly as she felt the baby stirring within her, a new possibility taking shape that neither of them had anticipated. Cooper's voice outside, calling to Mary that Sarah had returned safely, broke the moment, but the connection remained, unspoken, yet undeniable. A bridge between worlds that neither had believed could exist. The days following Sarah's journey to the reservation passed in peaceful routine. April brought warming temperatures and the first wildflowers dotting the prairie. Elijah's recovery progressed steadily. His arm remained splintered, but was healing well, and the wound on his head had closed completely, leaving only a thin scar. Along his temple, Sarah noticed subtle changes in their interactions. Elijah spoke more freely, sharing stories of his childhood and asking questions about her life before Thomas. In the evenings, they often sat outside her cabin, watching the sunset paint the vast sky in spectacular colors. These quiet moments became precious to Sarah, a respite from the anxieties that still lingered in the back of her mind. "Your baby will come soon," Elijah observed one evening, as Sarah shifted uncomfortably on the bench they shared. The women at the reservation would say he is preparing for his journey into this world. Sarah smiled, placing a hand on her belly. Mary says the same thing, though with less poetry. She's already preparing the cabin for the birth. "You're not afraid?" Elijah asked, studying her face in the fading light. "A little," Sarah admitted. "But Mary has delivered countless babies, and the trading post is more comfortable than most places to bring a child into the world." She paused, then added softly, "I only wish Thomas could be here to see his son." Elijah was silent for a moment. "He will see through the eyes of the spirits. My people believe those who have crossed over remain close to their loved ones, especially in moments of great importance." The sentiment brought unexpected comfort to Sarah. "I'd like to believe that." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of an approaching rider. Both tensed instinctively. Unexpected visitors still triggered wariness after Lieutenant Miller's previous intrusions. Cooper emerged from the trading post, hand resting near the shotgun he kept by the door. As the rider drew closer, however, his posture relaxed. "It's Walsh," he called to them. "The mail carrier." Thaddeus Walsh was a familiar figure at the trading post, delivering letters and packages from Cedar Ridge and beyond. The gaunt, weathered man dismounted with a nod to Cooper, reaching into his saddlebag. "Got something for Mrs. Mitchell," he announced, producing an official-looking envelope from Cedar Ridge. Sarah approached with curiosity. She had received no mail since arriving at the trading post, having no family or close friends to correspond with. Walsh handed her the envelope with a tip of his hat. "Thank you," she said, examining the official seal of the Cedar Ridge Town Council. "Been some excitement in town," Walsh commented, accepting the cup of coffee Mary brought out to him. "That mining company that owned the operation where your husband worked. They're settling claims with the families of the men who died in the collapse." Sarah's heart quickened. "Settling claims?" Walsh nodded. "Compensation money. Not much by city standards, but a tidy sum for these parts. Talk is they're trying to avoid lawsuits before expanding operations." With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a formal letter expressing deepest regrets for Thomas's death and informing her that, as his widow, she was entitled to a settlement of $500, a substantial amount that could change her circumstances dramatically. "There's more," Walsh added, sipping his coffee. "The Mitchells are making noise about the money, claiming they're Thomas's next of kin since you and he weren't married long." "That's ridiculous," Cooper interjected. "Sarah is his wife, and carrying his child. The law is clear," Walsh shrugged. "Just telling you what I heard. The town council's holding the money until it's sorted out. Mrs. Mitchell needs to appear in person to make her claim." The news left Sarah reeling. The settlement money would provide security for her and the baby, enough to perhaps buy a small property, establish independence. Yet the prospect of confronting the Mitchells, of returning to Cedar Ridge where she had faced such cruelty, filled her with dread. After Walsh departed, Sarah shared the letter with Elijah, who listened gravely. "This money would give you and your child a future," he observed. "You must claim it." "I know," Sarah agreed. "But the thought of seeing the Mitchells again, of having to fight them for what is rightfully mine—" "I will go with you," Elijah stated simply. Sarah looked up in surprise. "To Cedar Ridge, but the army is still looking for you. Lieutenant Miller—" "Miller is one man," Elijah interrupted, "and this is too important for you to face alone." His willingness to risk his safety for her touched Sarah deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." "Nothing will happen," Elijah assured her. "We'll plan carefully. Cooper will help." That night, as Sarah lay in bed contemplating this unexpected development, she felt the first strange tightening across her abdomen, different from the baby's usual movements. It passed quickly, and she thought little of it until it happened again an hour later, slightly stronger. By morning, the sensations were coming regularly, though still mild. Mary, experienced in such matters, confirmed what Sarah already suspected. "The baby's coming," she announced after examining Sarah. "Not immediately. First babies often take their time, but within a day or two I'd wager." The news added urgency to the question of Cedar Ridge and the settlement money. Cooper, practical as always, proposed a solution. "I'll ride to Cedar Ridge. Today, speak to the town council myself," he offered. "Explain your condition and request an extension. No reasonable person would expect a woman about to give birth to make that journey." Sarah agreed gratefully. While Cooper prepared for the trip, Elijah remained by her side, his presence a steady comfort as the labor pains gradually intensified. By midday, there was no doubt that the baby was indeed coming, perhaps faster than Mary had anticipated. "Men, out," Mary ordered when Sarah's waters broke late that afternoon. "This is women's business now." Cooper had already departed for Cedar Ridge, but Elijah hesitated, concern evident in his dark eyes. "Go," Sarah assured him through gritted teeth as another contraction gripped her. "I'm in good hands." Reluctantly, Elijah retreated to the trading post, where he paced restlessly as evening fell, listening to the occasional cries that escaped from Sarah's cabin. Hours passed in excruciating slowness, the night deepening around the trading post as Sarah labored to bring her child into the world. Near midnight, when the pain seemed unbearable and Sarah's strength was flagging, Mary whispered, "Encouragement. Just a little more, dear, your boy is almost here." With a final tremendous effort, Sarah pushed, and the miraculous sound of a newborn's cry filled the small cabin. Tears of relief and joy streamed down her face as Mary placed the squirming, red-faced infant on her chest. "A beautiful son," Mary pronounced, her own eyes wet with emotion. "Strong and perfect." Sarah gazed down at her child, overwhelmed by a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. The baby's shock of dark hair and round face reminded her instantly of Thomas, bringing both pain and healing in equal measure. "Hello, little one," she whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "I've waited so long to meet you." After Mary had cleaned and swaddled the infant. She opened the cabin door to announce the news. Elijah stood just outside, his tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. "A boy," Mary told him, smiling broadly. "Mother and child both well." Elijah's typically stoic expression softened with genuine joy. "May I see them?" Mary hesitated, then nodded. "Just briefly. They both need rest." The cabin was warm and dimly lit when Elijah entered. Sarah lay propped on pillows, her hair damp with exertion, but her face radiant as she cradled her newborn son. Something shifted in Elijah's chest at the sight, a protective instinct so powerful it startled him. "You did well, Sarah Mitchell," he said softly, approaching the bedside. Sarah looked up, her smile tired but luminous. "Meet Thomas Jackson Mitchell," she said, using the name she had chosen to honor both her husband and Cooper, who had been so kind to her. Elijah gazed down at the infant, who had fallen asleep against his mother's breast. "He has a strong spirit," he observed. "I can see it in his face." "Would you like to hold him?" Sarah offered. Surprise flickered across Elijah's features, followed by uncertainty. "I've never—" "It's easy," Sarah assured him. "Just support his head." With uncharacteristic tentativeness, Elijah accepted the small bundle. The baby stirred slightly, but remained asleep, one tiny hand escaping the blanket to curl reflexively around Elijah's finger. The simple gesture created an immediate bond that Elijah felt with startling clarity, a connection he had neither sought nor expected. "Hello, Thomas Jackson," he whispered in Lakota, the words forming a traditional blessing for a new life. When he looked up, he found Sarah watching him with an expression that mirrored his own sense of wonder. Mary, who had been discreetly busy at the other end of the cabin, cleared her throat. "The new mother needs rest now," she announced firmly. Elijah carefully returned the baby to Sarah's arms, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Thank you," he said simply, the words conveying deeper meaning than they might have in another context. As he left the cabin, a strange lightness filled Elijah's chest, a sensation of possibility he had not felt in years. The night sky above seemed to reflect his mood, vast and open, scattered with stars that spoke of infinite potential. Dawn was breaking when Cooper returned from Cedar Ridge, his expression troubled as he dismounted. "What news?" Elijah asked, meeting him at the stable. Cooper sighed heavily. "The Mitchells have filed a formal challenge to Sarah's claim. They're arguing the marriage was invalid because Thomas was underage when they wed, requiring parental permission he never received." "Was he underage?" Elijah asked, frowning. "No," Cooper replied firmly. "I saw the marriage certificate. Thomas was 22, but the Mitchells have influence in Cedar Ridge, and they're pushing for a formal hearing." Elijah's jaw tightened. "When?" 2 weeks from now. I explained Sarah's condition, but the council was unmoved, said if she doesn't appear, the claim defaults to the Mitchells as next of kin. The injustice of it burned in Elijah's chest. "She just gave birth hours ago. The baby—" "A boy," Cooper interrupted, his stern face softening. "Mary told me when I rode in." "Both doing well?" Elijah nodded. "Both are strong. She named him Thomas Jackson." Emotion flickered across Cooper's weathered features. That's a fine name." He cleared his throat. "But this complicates matters. She can't travel with a newborn, especially not to face those vultures." Elijah was silent for a moment, weighing options and consequences. "The settlement money rightfully belongs to Sarah and her son. Without it, their future remains uncertain." "I know," Cooper agreed grimly. "But the law works differently for people like the Mitchells than it does for a woman alone, especially one without means or connections." A plan began to form in Elijah's mind. Dangerous, perhaps even foolhardy, but with the potential to secure justice for Sarah and her child. "Not alone," he said quietly. Not anymore. Cooper studied him, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're thinking of going to Cedar Ridge with her. That's a risk, Black Fox. Miller's men are still looking for you. Some risks are worth taking. Elijah replied simply. The sun created the horizon, bathing the trading post in golden light. In the small cabin, where Sarah slept with her newborn son nestled against her, a new day was beginning, one that would set in motion events neither she nor Elijah could foresee, drawing them toward a future where the boundaries between their worlds would blur and ultimately transform. 2 weeks passed swiftly, filled with the joys and challenges of caring for a newborn. Little Thomas thrived under Sarah's attentive care, growing stronger each day. The tiny medicine pouch from the reservation hung above his makeshift cradle, a constant reminder of the unusual circumstances that had brought them to this moment. As the date of the hearing in Cedar Ridge approached, Sarah's anxiety mounted. She had recovered well from childbirth, but the prospect of confronting the Mitchells with a 2-week-old infant seemed nearly impossible. Yet the settlement money represented security for her son's future, too important to surrender without a fight. "We'll find a way," Elijah assured her one morning as they sat outside her cabin, Thomas sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms. "Cooper has arranged for testimonies from the preacher who married you and Thomas, and the mining company has confirmed your status as his legal widow." "Warren Mitchell has friends on the town council," Sarah reminded him, "and they've already shown they're willing to believe his lies about the marriage." Elijah's expression hardened. "Then we will bring truth so powerful it cannot be denied." The journey to Cedar Ridge was planned meticulously. Cooper would drive Sarah, the baby, and Elijah in his covered wagon, providing some protection from curious eyes. Mary prepared special tonics to keep Thomas calm during the journey and packed provisions for every contingency. The night before their departure, Sarah found herself unable to sleep, her thoughts racing with worry. A soft knock at her door revealed Elijah, his tall figure silhouetted against the starlit sky. "You should rest," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Tomorrow will require your strength." "I can't stop thinking about everything that could go wrong," Sarah admitted, inviting him inside. Thomas slept soundly in his cradle, making tiny sighing sounds that tugged at her heart. Elijah moved to stand beside the cradle, looking down at the sleeping infant with an expression that had become increasingly tender over the passing days. "In my mother's tradition," he said quietly, "when a warrior faces battle, he prepares not just his weapons but his spirit. Tonight I will keep watch so you may rest. Tomorrow we face this challenge together." The simple promise settled Sarah's anxieties more effectively than any elaborate reassurance could have done. Elijah pulled a chair near the door, his silent presence a bulwark against her fears. Wrapped in this unexpected security, Sarah finally drifted to sleep. Dawn broke clear and cool, ideal weather for traveling. Cooper had the wagon ready before sunrise, padded with blankets to cushion the jolts of the rough road. Mary fussed over Thomas, tucking extra swaddling cloths and a special pillow around him. "Remember," she instructed Sarah, "feed him before you reach town. A satisfied baby is a quiet baby." Sarah nodded, fighting back tears at Mary's motherly concern. "I don't know how to thank you both for everything you've done. Bring back what rightfully belongs to this little one," Cooper said gruffly, patting the infant's head with surprising gentleness. "That's enough, thanks." The journey to Cedar Ridge took most of the morning. Thomas remained remarkably peaceful, sleeping through the worst bumps and waking only to nurse before falling back into contented slumber. As they approached the outskirts of town, Elijah pulled his hat low over his face and wrapped a scarf around the lower portion, obscuring his distinctive features. "From here, I'm just a hired hand," he reminded them. "No one looks closely at such men." Cedar Ridge had changed little in the months since Sarah's departure. The main street bustled with the usual activity, miners coming off shift, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, ladies gossiping outside the millinery. A few curious glances were cast toward the wagon as it rumbled past, but no one seemed to recognize Sarah, bundled as she was with the baby. The town hall stood at the far end of the street, an imposing brick building that housed both government offices and the courtroom where the hearing would take place. Cooper drew the wagon to a halt in a side alley, out of direct view. "The hearing's set for noon," he said, checking his pocket watch. "We have half an hour." Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Thomas stirred against her chest, his tiny face scrunching momentarily before relaxing back into sleep. The sight of her son renewed her determination. This fight wasn't just for her, it was for his future. "I'm ready," she announced, more firmly than she felt. Elijah jumped down from the wagon first, then helped Sarah descend carefully, mindful of the precious bundle in her arms. Cooper secured the horses and joined them, straightening his collar. Nervously, "Remember," Elijah said quietly as they approached the town hall entrance, "you have nothing to be ashamed of. Hold your head high." The courtroom was already half filled when they entered, mostly with people Sarah recognized from her brief time in Cedar Ridge. Whispers fluttered through the room as she walked down the center aisle, clutching Thomas protectively against her. At the front sat Warren and Harriet Mitchell, their backs rigid with entitlement. Neither turned to acknowledge her arrival. The town council, 5 men seated behind an elevated desk, watched impassively as Sarah took her place at the small table designated for her. Cooper sat beside her, while Elijah remained standing at the back of the room, anonymous in his disguise, but watchful as a hawk. At precisely noon, Mayor Whitfield, who served as head of the council, banged his gavel. "This hearing is now in session," he announced. "We are here to determine the rightful recipient of the settlement payment from the Western Mining Company regarding the death of Thomas Mitchell." Warren Mitchell rose immediately. "My wife and I contend that the marriage between our son and Sarah Collins was invalid, as Thomas was not of legal age to marry without parental consent, which was never given. As his parents and next of kin, the settlement rightfully belongs to us." Sarah felt a surge of indignation at the blatant lie. Cooper squeezed her hand reassuringly as Mayor Whitfield turned to her. "Mrs. Mitchell, your response?" Sarah stood carefully, adjusting Thomas in her arms. "My husband was 22 years old when we married, well above the age requiring parental consent. I have our marriage certificate signed by Reverend Holloway, who performed the ceremony." She handed the document to Cooper, who brought it forward to the council. Warren Mitchell scoffed loudly. "A piece of paper easily forged," he declared. "Where is Reverend Holloway to verify its authenticity?" "I am here," came a voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see an elderly man in clerical attire enter the courtroom. Sarah recognized him immediately as the kind minister who had married her and Thomas in a simple ceremony the previous year. "Reverend Holloway!" Mayor Whitfield exclaimed in surprise. "We were told you had relocated to Missouri." "I received word that my testimony was needed," the Reverend replied, making his way to the front. "Mr. Cooper's letter reached me last week." Cooper nodded discreetly to Sarah, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. This had been part of their careful planning, tracking down the Reverend to provide crucial testimony. Reverend Holloway approached the council's table with dignity. "I can confirm that I performed the marriage of Thomas Mitchell and Sarah Collins on April 18, 1878. I verified Thomas's age as 22 years at that time, as recorded in the church registry and on the marriage certificate." Warren Mitchell's face flushed with anger. "This proves nothing. The boy lied about his age. He was barely 20. "That is not true, Mr. Mitchell," the Reverend replied calmly. "I've known Thomas since he was a child. I baptized him in 1857, which would indeed make him 22 at the time of his marriage." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Warren Mitchell sputtered incoherently while his wife's face had gone deathly pale. Mayor Whitfield cleared his throat. "This testimony certainly clarifies the question of age. However, Mr. Mitchell has also suggested that the marriage itself was questionable in nature." Harriet Mitchell seized this opening. "Everyone knows she trapped our son into marriage," she declared shrilly. "A girl with no family, no connections. What else could she offer but feminine wiles?" The crude accusation hung in the air like poison. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as whispers rippled through the crowd. Thomas stirred against her, perhaps sensing her distress. "If I may speak," came a deep voice from the back of the room. All eyes turned as Elijah stepped forward, removing his hat and scarf. A collective gasp rose from the assembly as his identity became clear, particularly from the Mitchells, who recoiled visibly. "This is outrageous," Warren Mitchell exclaimed. "An Indian has no place in these proceedings." "Mr. Blackfox is a registered scout and translator for the Army," Cooper interjected quickly. "He has standing to testify in this territory." Mayor Whitfield looked uncertain, but nodded reluctantly. "The council will hear him." Elijah approached with measured steps, his dignified bearing commanding attention despite the hostility directed at him from some quarters. "I came to know Sarah Mitchell when she was cast out of her in-laws' home during a blizzard, while carrying her late husband's child," he stated, his voice clear and strong. "She was given no shelter, no provisions, left to die in the storm. With her unborn baby." Shocked murmurs filled the courtroom, the Mitchells' faces contorted with rage and embarrassment. "He's lying," Warren Mitchell shouted. "A woman in her condition could not have survived that night without shelter," Elijah continued calmly. "Yet here she stands, with her healthy son, Thomas's son, the living proof of her character and her right to what Thomas intended for his family." At that moment, as if on cue, little Thomas awoke and began to fuss. Sarah gently soothed him, pulling back the blanket slightly to reveal his face. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as people noted the striking resemblance to his father, the same distinctive Mitchell jawline and brow that had marked generations of the family. Harriet Mitchell stared at the baby, her composure crumbling. For the first time, she seemed to truly see her grandson, the living continuation of her son's legacy, the birthmark, she whispered, just loudly enough to be heard, behind his ear. Sarah carefully turned Thomas, revealing a small, crescent-shaped mark behind his left ear, identical to one Thomas had carried. Warren Mitchell sat down heavily, the fight visibly draining from him. The evidence before them was irrefutable. Mayor Whitfield cleared his throat. "In light of the testimony and evidence presented, this council finds that Sarah Mitchell is indeed the legal widow of Thomas Mitchell and rightful recipient of the settlement payment." Relief washed over Sarah like a cleansing wave. The battle was won, not just for the money, but for something far more precious, her son's legacy and birthright. As the hearing concluded, Elijah stepped back, resuming his position near the door. Sarah found his eyes across the room, a silent exchange of triumph and gratitude passing between them. Outside the town hall, Sarah was approached by a subdued Harriet Mitchell. May I hold him?" the older woman asked hesitantly. "Just once." After a moment's consideration, Sarah carefully placed Thomas in his grandmother's arms. Harriet gazed down at the infant, tears forming in her eyes. "He looks just like Thomas did," she whispered. "We were wrong, so terribly wrong." Warren Mitchell stood awkwardly nearby, pride warring with the undeniable evidence of his grandson's existence. "The boy should know his family," he muttered grudgingly. Sarah reclaimed her son, cradling him protectively. "My son will know his father through stories and memories I'll share. As for his grandparents, that will depend on how they choose to treat him and his mother, going forward. The statement, delivered with quiet dignity, left no doubt that Sarah would accept nothing less than complete respect from the Mitchells if they wished to be part of Thomas's life. With the settlement secured and the confrontation behind them, Sarah joined Cooper and Elijah at the wagon. As they prepared to leave Cedar Ridge, she felt lighter than she had in months, unburdened by the fear and uncertainty that had shadowed her since Thomas's death. "What will you do now?" Cooper asked as they traveled back toward the trading post. $500 is enough to start fresh almost anywhere. Sarah looked down at her sleeping son, then across at Elijah, who had removed his disguise and sat quietly watching the passing landscape. "I've been thinking about that," she said, slowly. What if we used part of the money to expand the trading post? Add proper living quarters, maybe a separate building for a school?" Cooper raised his eyebrows in surprise. "A school?" Sarah nodded, her confidence growing as she articulated the vision that had been forming in her mind. "For all children in the area, settlers and native alike, a place where they could learn to understand each other's ways." "The army would never allow it," Cooper warned, though interest sparked in his eyes. "They might," Elijah interjected thoughtfully, "if it were presented as a way to civilize native children. I know the words they want to hear, even if the reality would be something quite different." The idea hung between them, radical yet full of possibility, a bridge between worlds that normally existed in separation or conflict. "It won't be easy," Cooper cautioned. "Folks on both sides might resist." "Little worth doing is ever easy," Sarah replied, smiling down at Thomas. "But this little one deserves a world better than the one we've given him so far. Maybe we can start building it, one small piece at a time." As the wagon crested a hill, the trading post came into view in the distance, its modest buildings silhouetted against the vast prairie sky. For Sarah, it no longer represented merely a temporary refuge, but the foundation of something new, a future she could build with her own hands, for her son, and perhaps for others who existed in the margins between cultures. Elijah's hand found hers on the wagon seat, a brief touch that conveyed understanding and shared purpose. No words were needed between them. The journey that had begun in a desperate blizzard had transformed them both, creating possibilities neither could have imagined on their own. Thomas stirred in Sarah's arms, his tiny face turning instinctively toward the warmth of the afternoon sun. In that moment, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that the path ahead, though unmarked and unprecedented, was the one they were meant to travel together. "Mitakuye oyas inji," she whispered, the Lakota phrase Elijah had taught her coming naturally to her lips. "We are all related." Beside her, Elijah smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his usually solemn features. "Yes," he agreed softly, "all related." And in that simple truth lay the foundation for their future, one built not on the separations and prejudices of the past, but on the recognition of connections that ran deeper than blood or tradition, binding them together in a family forged through compassion, courage, and love. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.